This video answers how I eliminated judgmental, criticizing thoughts I had about myself and others. And I promise this is not an exaggeration. And with this information, it's going to be possible for you too, and it may even be easier than you think. Welcome back. My name is Alaric, the Zen Cowboy, and I teach philosophy and psycho-spiritual therapy. And today we're going to be reading another chapter from my book, Heart of Humanity, with the chapter being the virtue of honesty. And it may seem odd at first glance how honesty can help us obliterate our judgments and criticisms. But if you stick with me to the end, it's going to make perfect sense and you're going to be excited to put it into practice. Virtue 4, the flower of honesty, page 103. Honesty as a virtue goes much deeper than not being intentionally deceptive and telling the truth. In Dunisha, honesty is the personal vow to speak of things clearly without adding accidental meaning to things unknowable or misguiding ourselves and others with our biased opinions and limited perceptions. Many people fall into, quote, negative self-certainty because they have strong negative beliefs about themselves or strong judgments against others and or things in the world. Let's go ahead and explore negative self-certainty for a moment. So to begin, thoughts that we continue to think eventually become beliefs. And those beliefs eventually become expectations of reality that feel very concrete in our lives. They magically transcend opinion and become facts, but not really. But when we have a negative self-certainty about ourselves or others, we're experiencing them as fact. And that is why we get so hung up emotionally on things and so attached to things. And this is where a lot of human suffering comes from. But at the end of the day, they're just opinion. And when we're in therapy or when we're in coaching, it's really beautiful to watch clients start to unravel these self-certainties that they have about themselves and others. And as those beliefs start to kind of break apart, you notice how a freshness, a peaceness starts to well up within individuals. But more on that to come. Let's take a breath and continue. To be fully honest at all times means dissolving all strong beliefs and hard opinions we have about ourselves and others, because beliefs and opinions are not facts. To be honest is to be willing to admit our narrowness of perception and our limited ability to intake, process, and store information. In Dunisha, being honest is synonymous with being open-minded. To speak honestly is to honor our limitations and cognitive biases, allowing openness and space for the boundless perceptions and types of information we simply don't or can't have access to. Therefore, honesty is the virtue and practice that helps us actualize the wisdom of Tenet 4, ignorance is an illusion, we seek understanding. Let's go ahead and recap that tenet, ignorance is an illusion, we seek understanding. So how I teach this is that there's inherent ignorance and there's willful ignorance. So inherent ignorance is what we were just talking about. It's the limited ability for us to have the full perception of all the things and all the intake of information. It's just not possible. Any thought or opinion we have about something or someone is always incomplete because we can't have access to all the knowledge and all the backstory and all the cause and effects that are going on. And so this humbles us, where we recognize our inherent ignorance in all things, so we do our best to keep an open mind. Willful ignorance, on the other hand, is the exact opposite. It is the choice to not look deeper. It is the choice to not have an open mind. It is the choice to not self-explore. And things just become very dualistic into the categories of right, wrong, good, bad. And unfortunately, that leads to a lot of suffering. Could you imagine going into a therapy session with a therapist that is willfully ignorant and just judges all of your issues as, well, you're just a bad person and everything that you're doing is wrong? No! That would be so traumatic. In contrast, as social workers and therapists, we're actually taught about inherent ignorance. In other words, we're taught that we all have our own biases, that we all have our own different levels of cultural competency. And when we're aware of this, and when we're aware of our limitations, it allows us to cultivate a self-awareness and to help bridge those gaps in our ignorance to help meet our clients where they're at, versus just projecting our judgments onto them, which is not healing whatsoever. So it's fascinating that we receive that in therapy and we applaud it, but we don't necessarily practice it in our everyday lives. And this teaching of the virtue of honesty is inviting us to take more of a self-aware, honest look at our opinions and our biases so that we can soften them and have more peace. Let's take a breath. How can we judge someone when they are inherently more than whatever it is we're judging them to be? How can we judge ourselves when we are more than we're judging ourselves to be? When we are closed-minded, we hone in on past traits and foibles of people that pigeonhole them so they forever remain what they were in the past. But this is never the fullness of who anyone is. However, we are not throwing discernment out the window. That's really important, that little tidbit there, not throwing out discernment. Because although we're not practicing judgment, we're still going to be practicing discernment on what is painful, what is harmful, versus what is healing, what is unifying. But you see that the word choice I'm using there, rather than saying what is right, wrong, good, bad, I'm looking at it more from a neutral standpoint or a less judgmental standpoint of, well, is this harmful for me? Is this healing for me? Because that is speaking more factually about something versus just kind of throwing it all together in a lump sum of, that's bad. And the example I use, especially my first book, Living Peace, is, when we're teaching children that smoking is bad, that's just a judgment. That's not helpful. But when instead we take the time to explain why it is harmful to your health, that is on a whole different other level. And when we're saying a certain activity is bad, and there's all this morality and condemnation around it, when we actually participate in that activity, we might then develop a negative self-narrative that we ourselves are bad, not realizing that it's actually just the activity that is harmful. And that's why it is so important to distinguish and use our vocabulary to distinguish dualistic terminology versus more of the polarity of healing and harmful versus right, wrong, good, bad. Pretty cool stuff. Let's take a breath. When we begin to speak more honestly about things, we cannot help but soften ourselves in the process. Opinions are never full honesty. They may be honest in the traditional sense of expressing how we feel, but feelings are not absolute truths either, because whenever we change our minds, we change our feelings. Thus, we change the, quote, truth of our perceived reality. Previously, in Mastery of Emotion, we learned just how connected our mind and emotions are. Much of what we feel is based on conditioned perceptions, all of which can be altered. It's amazing how one new piece of information can change someone's mood in an instant. Thus, emotions and feelings, although wonderful to pay attention to, they are not the best indicators of truth or honest expressions. Let me repeat that. Thus, emotions and feelings are not the best indicators of truth or honest expressions. Woo! I love this section. I absolutely love this section because I can't tell you how many times in my sessions with clients that someone has been chewing on something for, let's just say, anywhere from 2 months to 20 years. Literally, I've had people come in with carrying the weight of 20 years on something on their shoulders. And by just altering their perception around the event, thing, or belief, instant relief. You see relief and peace just wash over their entire body, and it's like they're breathing fully for the first time. And life did not change. All that changed was their thoughts about it. And a lot of times what I'm helping my clients do is taking a more full, honest look at situations or at themselves or at other people. And when we're looking at it from a full state of honesty, all the elements involved, not just pigeonholing some negative self-certainty, then we can't help but soften. We can't help but take a step back and realize that these hardcore judgments and beliefs and negative expectations of reality that we have are not honest. And that is the magic. This is the magic that allows me to have so much more peace in my life, because anytime a negative thought creeps up, I realize it's often just 1% of a greater 99% of reality that I'm not perceiving in that moment. Let's take a breath. In Indonesia, we cultivate the virtue of honesty through unconditional acknowledgement. We can be acutely aware of our limitations and cognitive biases and still express ourselves in helpful ways. When emotionally charged in a harmful way, we can still speak through it, honoring our feelings and recognizing that we're caught in our neurosis while also asking for help. When speaking opinions, we learn to be more mindful in our approach, disclaiming that our words are indeed an opinion or preference, which let people know not to take them as fact. And when observing ourselves through the lens of judgment, we learn to see and speak beyond pigeonholing, allowing space for our view of people and things to change as new information inevitably presents itself. I love it. I think this is definitely one of my favorite chapters, just because this whole approach, this new approach to honesty is just so juicy for me. And when we realize that any opinion is not true honesty, it can really humble us. And in that humility, we can't help but have more compassion for ourselves and others. And to me, that's where a lot of peace comes from. Anytime I have a judgment against someone else, it hurts. It does not feel good. But when I'm able to take a step back and look at the bigger picture and have a bit more compassion and even well-wish them, that's healing for me. And so moving forward with this practice, I'm inviting you all this week, in the next few weeks, just moving forward for the rest of your life. Ask yourself, anytime you have a judgment, ask yourself if you're giving full grace and full honesty in that moment. And the answer is always going to be no. And even the worst of the worst individuals that are very harmful individuals, there's always some still divine bit. You know, they might hold the door open for people, or maybe they're good to animals. You know, there's always something beautiful to be found in any individual person. And I'm telling you what, it does not serve you. You can still have your preferences and you can still have healthy separation if there's abuse involved, but it does not serve you to hate anyone. It does not serve you to be overly critical or judgmental to where it creates malice in your body or tension or even just stress in your body anytime you think of this person. What is freeing is peace. And what allows us to have that free is to take a full honest look and realize that there's cause and effects of everything. And even the people who've caused the most harm on the planet, if you actually look at their backstory in their life, you see how one thing led to another, led to another, led to another. And that is how we can create compassion. And that ultimately is how we can lead to healing our planet and healing one another and creating more of a restorative approach to any time we see misalignment in the world versus just full-on punishment. Because when we go on full punishment for ourselves or others, all that does is create more pain and separation. But when we go to a more restorative approach, that is healing. So, if you liked today's video, please give it a thumbs up because that does help the algorithm place it in front of more people's eyes. Give a subscribe if you liked it. And one of the best ways to support me is picking up a copy of my book, Heart of Humanity, and leaving a review on Amazon. Thank you all so much for being here, and I'll see you in the next video. Mwah!